Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are turning our attention to the single largest asset class in the entire world.
It's a big one.
It's a huge one. It's a topic that really sits at the intersection of, your personal net worth, the global economy, and the physical environment itself. We were talking about real estate.
Yeah.
But before you tune out thinking this is just going to be about, mortgage rates or how to flip a duplex.
Which it is not.
It is not.
Yeah.
I want to be really clear about our mission today.
Yeah.
We are not looking at the market in the, Zillow scrolling sense.
Yeah.
We are looking at the machinery.
Exactly. I think the term real estate is so ubiquitous that it's kind of lost its weight.
Yeah.
We just see it as a transaction, buying a house, renting an apartment. But if you zoom out, real estate is, and I mean this literally, the stage upon which all human history plays out.
That's a great way to put it.
It is the ground beneath our feet, yes, but it is also this legal fiction that allows us to claim we own a piece of the planet.
That is the part that always trips me up. The idea that you can just draw a line in the dirt and say, okay, everything inside this square is mine and everything outside is yours.
Right.
That's actually a pretty modern invention in the grand scheme of things. And it's an invention that, it requires a massive amount of legal and economic infrastructure just to maintain it.
It's the ultimate universal asset. And it's defined by one very specific legal concept, immovability.
Right.
Unlike, stocks, bonds, or gold bars, you can't put it in your pocket. You can't move it. It's fixed. And because it's fixed, it becomes the foundation pun, definitely intended for, the entire concept of the nation state and the modern economy.
So, okay, let's peel back the layers. We have a stack of research here, and I mean a stack, that covers everything from Roman law to the carbon footprint of concrete.
It's a lot.
It is. We're going to look at how land became property, the very specific economic disasters that invented the 30-year mortgage.
Which is a surprisingly recent invention.
It really is. And we're going to touch on the darker side of the industry from, money laundering all the way to environmental degradation.
And I think we should probably start with that core definition, immovable property. Because in the legal world, the distinction between real estate and, everything else is the most fundamental line in the sand.
Right. Okay, so this is the big one. Real property versus personal property. I think most people sort of intuitively get this. My car is personal property, my house is real property. But the legal implications are huge. It's not just about what you can carry. It's about something called the bundle of rights.
That is the key phrase. The bundle of rights. When you buy a piece of real estate, you aren't just buying the dirt in the wood, you are buying a bundle of legal privileges.
Okay, so what's in the bundle?
You've got the right of possession, so you can occupy it. The right of control, you can use it as you like, within the law, of course. The right of exclusion.
Keeping people off your lawn.
Exactly. Keeping others off.
Yeah.
The right of enjoyment, using it in any legal manner. And, crucially, the right of disposition.
Meaning you can sell it.
You can sell it, lease it, give it away. But as you said, that bundle can be unbundled, which is where it gets really interesting.
This is what blows my mind. I can sell the land, but keep the mineral rights under the ground.
You can. Or you can sell the building but lease the land underneath it. It's called a ground lease.
Or you can sell the air rights, which is how we get those, those super skinny skyscrapers in Midtown Manhattan that seem to just hover over old, smaller buildings.
Precisely. In a place like New York, air rights are a tradable commodity. You can literally buy the empty space above a historic church and stack it on top of your new luxury condo tower a block away.
That is just wild.
It's turning three-dimensional space into a financial asset. But going back to that basic definition, this distinction between real and personal property can get really tricky. Especially in the commercial world, we have this concept of fixtures.
The famous shake test. I've heard of this.
The shake test, yeah.
If you could theoretically pick the building up and shake it, whatever falls out is personal property. Whatever stays attached is real estate.
That's the shorthand, yeah. And it's a good one. But legally, it's a little more nuanced than that. For example, if I own a factory and I bolt a massive 10-ton printing press to the concrete floor, is that real estate?
Well, according to the shake test, it is. It's bolted down. It's not falling out.
Right. But in most cases, that would be considered a trade fixture. It's personal property that's used for business.
Yeah.
The intent is that when I move my factory, I'm taking my press with me.
Okay, so intent matters.
Intent is huge. Whereas if you bolt a big crystal chandelier to the ceiling of your dining room,
That sting.
that becomes part of the house. It's a fixture. You sell the house, you're selling the chandelier, and unless you specifically exclude it in the contract.
So it's about the relationship of the object to the property and the intent behind it.
Exactly. And this gets even wilder when you look at natural resources. The definition of real estate includes the trees, the water on the land, the minerals underneath. But what about, say, the wildlife?
I found this absolutely fascinating in the research. The legal concept of, what was it, fere naturae?
Yes, wild animals. It's Latin. Under common law, generally, wild animals are considered part of the natural resource of the land, but only in a very specific sense.
Wait, so you don't own the deer walking across your property in the same way you own the tree it's standing next to?
You don't. You have the right to hunt it on your land, subject to state and federal laws, of course, but until you capture or kill it, it technically belongs to no one. Or, some would argue, it belongs to the state in trust for the public.
So the deer is kind of a free agent until it interacts with my bundle of rights in a very final way.
In a way, yes. But the tree is real estate. It's attached to the land. It's immovable. Until you cut it down, the moment your chainsaw severs it from the stump, it undergoes a legal transformation. It's no longer real property. It becomes personal property. It's lumber.
So you can have a magical transformation of asset classes just by starting up a chainsaw.
That is the machinery we're talking about. These are the invisible rules that govern everything.
And this machinery didn't just appear out of thin air. It evolved over centuries. And the very word real estate is itself an etymological clue, right? Real doesn't mean genuine or authentic in this context.
No, not at all. It comes from the Latin word res, which just means thing or matter. In old law, it referred to a real action, a lawsuit that was about recovering the thing itself, the land, as opposed to just getting monetary damages.
And estate.
Estate comes from status. It refers to the nature and extent of your interest in that land, your status in relation to the thing.
So when we say real estate, we are effectively saying the status of your interest in the thing.
You could absolutely say that. It's a very precise legal term. It defines the relationship between a person and a piece of land. Are you a feudal tenant paying tribute to a lord? Do you have a fee simple interest?
Which is the one we think of today, total ownership.
Right, absolute ownership.
Yeah.
Or do you have a life estate, where you own it only until you die and then it automatically reverts to someone else? All of those are different types of estate.
Fee simple is the gold standard, though. That's what you want when you buy a house.
That is the goal. Total ownership, transferable to your heirs, in theory, forever. But that concept, that a single individual can hold fee simple dominion over a slice of the earth, is a very specific product of history. It's not a universal human constant.
Which takes us back to the roots. So we usually just nod to Roman law here and move on. But I want to dig into the philosophical shift that had to happen later, the idea of natural law.
This is absolutely crucial. In the 15th, 16th, 17th centuries, you have European thinkers who were trying to justify the concept of ownership, especially as they start exploring and colonizing the rest of the world.
They needed a theory that could travel.
A portable justification. And a big name here is Emmerich de Vattel.
De Vattel, his book The Law of Nations from 1758.
Yes. Vattel was a Swiss jurist, and his work basically became the handbook for international relations for centuries. He argued that private property ownership was a natural right, that it was essential for the cultivation of the earth and for the advancement of society.
And this was, well, it was a very convenient argument, right? Because if you land on a continent where the indigenous population doesn't have fences and deeds and property records, you can use Vattel's logic to say, well, they aren't improving the land in a way that we recognize, therefore it's basically vacant. It's up for grabs.
It provided the legal and, in their view, moral cover for colonization. Vattel argued that if land wasn't being used for agriculture, if it was just, say, hunting grounds, it wasn't really being used at all, and thus it wasn't fully owned in the natural law sense.
That's a powerful idea.
It's an idea that shaped the world. This thinking underpinned the expansion of European powers, and eventually, it was baked into the DNA of the United States.
So you really can't separate the history of real estate from the history of conquest.
You absolutely cannot. The surveyor's chain followed the soldier's musket almost every time.
Speaking of surveyors, we should give a little nod to the profession itself. You know, we see them on the side of the road with their tripods, or their total stations, I guess they're called now. But back in the 1500s and 1600s, this was high-tech, cutting-edge work.
It was the data science of its day. You had surveying in England, which was this broad profession of measuring, mapping, and managing land. But in North America, we kind of split the job in two.
How so?
We developed surveyors, who are the people who measured the boundaries, drew the lines on the map, and we developed appraisers, who are the people who determined the value of what was inside those lines.
And that split kind of makes sense in the context of the American frontier, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You had these vast, unmapped, unvalued territories.
Exactly. You needed the surveyor first, just to tell you what was there. Then the appraiser could come in and say what it was worth. And that profession is older than you'd think. The oldest continuously operating real estate brokerage firm,
I saw this fact. It's Baird and Warner, right?
Baird and Warner,
No.
established in Chicago in 1855. It was originally called L.D. Olmsted & Co. So, this business of buying and selling land has been a formal industry for a very long time.
And all of that surveying and appraising and selling leads us to the biggest real estate deal in the history of the world.
The Louisiana Purchase, 1803.
This is the moment where the scale of American real estate goes from, colonial to continental.
It's hard to overstate the magnitude of this deal. The U.S. acquired the Louisiana Territory from Napoleonic France. We're talking over 800,000 square miles of land. It doubled the size of the country overnight.
For a price of $15 million.
$15 million.
I've seen the math on this, and it's just staggering. It comes out to something like 4 cents an acre.
Roughly 4 cents an acre. It's an unbelievable number, but we have to be really careful with how we interpret that number.
Right, because this goes right back to what we just said about Vattel and natural law. The U.S. didn't pay France for the fee simple ownership of every single acre.
No. France didn't own the backyard of a Sioux family living in the Dakotas. What the U.S. bought was the preemptive right.
The preemptive right, what did that mean?
It means they bought the sovereignty from a European perspective. They bought the exclusive right to be the ones to negotiate with, or more often, conquer the indigenous peoples who were actually living there. They bought the right to acquire that land without interference from Spain or Britain.
So the 4 cents an acre was just the entry fee.
It was the entry fee, the actual cost of acquiring that land, in terms of wars, broken treaties, displacement, and payments, was vastly higher over the next century.
But from a purely economic perspective, that deal just flooded the American market with land. It created this national ethos that land was basically infinite.
And cheap. It set off a century of rampant speculation. When land is that abundant, people don't just buy it to use it, they buy it to flip it.
This is where the American obsession with real estate speculation really begins.
Absolutely. You had the canal booms, the railroad booms. Everyone was trying to buy the empty plot of land where they thought the next town or the next train station would be built.
And speculation, as we know, inevitably leads to bubbles, which in turn leads to busts.
The biggest of them all.
Which brings us to the Great Depression. I feel like when we learn about the 1929 crash in school, we focus so much on the stock market, we see the images of the ticker tape, we don't talk enough about the real estate crash that followed.
The real estate crash was, arguably, more devastating for the average American family. And to understand why, you have to understand what a mortgage looked like in, say, 1928.
It wasn't the 30-year fixed-rate loan that we think of as normal today.
Not even close. It was a totally different animal. Back then, a typical mortgage was a short-term loan, maybe 3 to 5 years.
That's it.
That's it. And you usually had to put 50% down, a huge barrier to entry. Then, for those 3 to 5 years, you paid interest only.
So your payments weren't even touching the principal.
Not a dime. And then at the end of the term, a massive balloon payment was due for the entire principal amount, all at once.
Wow. So every 3 to 5 years, you had to either have enough cash to pay off the entire house, or you had to find a bank that was willing to refinance you into a new loan.
Exactly. And that system works okay, I guess, as long as property values are steadily rising and banks are liquid and happy to lend.
But in 1930...
In 1930, the music stopped, the banks had failed, there was no money to lend. Property values had dropped by 50% in just 4 years.
So even if you still had your job and you were making your interest payments on time, when that balloon payment hit...
You were out. Your bank couldn't refinance you because they didn't have the cash. And you couldn't sell the house to cover the loan because it was now worth less than what you owed on it. You were underwater.
It was a systemic collapse.
A total meltdown. Foreclosures were happening at a rate of 1,000 per day in 1933. 1,000 families a day losing their homes.
So the government has to step in. And this is where the alphabet soup of the New Deal doesn't just save the economy, it actually changes the fundamental structure of the American dream.
They had to reinvent the entire market from the ground up. First, you get the HOLC, the Homeowners Loan Corporation.
What did they do?
Their job was to go out and buy up all these toxic, defaulted mortgages from the banks. And then they reinstated them with new terms for the homeowner. They stretched the payments out to 15, then 20 years.
And crucially, they introduced this new idea of amortization.
Yes. This was the birth of amortization on a mass scale. The idea that each monthly payment would include both interest and a little bit of principal, so that over the life of the loan, you're slowly but surely paying it down.
That seems so obvious now, but it was a radical idea at the time.
It was a game changer, but it created a new problem. Banks were terrified of lending money for that long. 20 or 30 years is a huge risk for a lender.
So how did the government solve that?
They created the FHA, the Federal Housing Administration, with the National Housing Act of 1934. The FHA basically went to the banks and made them an offer they couldn't refuse.
Which was?
You lend the money to the home buyer for 30 years with a low down payment, and we, the federal government, will insure that loan. If the borrower defaults, we will pay you back.
So it completely de-risked the entire system for the banks.
Completely, and it unleashed a torrent of capital into the housing market. Suddenly, you didn't need 50% down. You could buy a home with 10 or 20% down. Then, to complete the picture, they created Fannie Mae in 1938.
To create a secondary market.
Exactly. Fannie Mae would buy the FHA-insured mortgages from the banks, which gave the banks their cash back immediately so they could go out and fund new homes. It created a perpetual motion machine for housing finance.
But we have to pause here, because while this new system saved the housing market and built the American middle class, it also codified segregation. This was not a rising tide that lifted all boats.
No. It absolutely was not. The FHA had to decide which loans it was going to insure. And to do that, they created these elaborate maps to assess the risk of lending in every neighborhood in America.
And they explicitly graded those neighborhoods based on racial composition.
Explicitly. This is the origin of the term redlining.
Explain that.
The FHA appraisers would literally draw lines on maps. Green areas were the new homogeneous white suburbs. They were deemed the best credit risks. Blue areas were still desirable. Yellow areas were definitely declining. And red areas were hazardous.
And the red areas were?
The red areas were almost always the neighborhoods where African Americans and other minority groups lived. The FHA would not insure mortgages in those redlined areas. Period.
So this meant that while white families were getting these government-subsidized, low-interest, wealth-building loans to move to the suburbs and buy new houses,
Black families were completely locked out of the formal mortgage market. They couldn't get loans to buy in their own neighborhoods, and they couldn't get loans to move to the new suburbs. They were trapped.
And because real estate is the primary way that middle-class families build generational wealth in America, this one policy created a racial wealth gap that we are still dealing with today.
Precisely. This wasn't just about the personal prejudice of some banker. This was official federal policy, written down in black and white in the FHA's underwriting manuals.
And it wasn't until the Civil Rights era.
It wasn't until the Fair Housing Act of 1968, which was Title VIII of the Civil Rights Act, that this was finally made illegal. But by then, 60 years of damage had been done. The suburbs were built, the equity was generated, and the economic patterns were set in stone.
It's a really sobering reminder that this machinery of real estate isn't neutral. It can be and has been tuned to include some and exclude others.
And that machinery keeps evolving. Let's fast forward a bit. Jump to 1999, the World Wide Web.
The internet arrives. Zillow, Redfin, the democratization of data.
It completely changed the information asymmetry in the market. Before the internet, your real estate broker held all the cards. They had the big book of listings, the multiple listing service.
The MLS.
Yeah. You, as a consumer, had no access to it. Now you can sit on your couch and see the price history of every house on your block, the tax assessment, the school ratings, everything. It turned real estate into the spectator sport we were talking about earlier.
But even with all that data at our fingertips, the actual ownership structures can still be incredibly confusing. We tend to gloss over this, but let's really drill down into the difference between a condominium and a co-op. Because if you're trying to buy an apartment in a city like New York, or if you're even looking at international markets, this distinction is legally massive.
It's the difference between owning a piece of real estate and owning a piece of a business.
Okay, walk us through it. Let's start with the condo.
A condominium is real property. It's fee simple. You own your unit, that box of air and everything inside it is yours. You get a deed for it. You pay property taxes on that specific unit.
And I can sell it to pretty much anyone I want.
Generally speaking, yes. The condo association might have a right of first refusal, but they can't just arbitrarily tell you who you can and can't sell to.
Okay, so that's a condo. Now, a co-op,
A housing cooperative is a totally different legal structure. In a co-op, a corporation owns the entire building, the land, the bricks, everything.
the whole thing is one asset.
One asset owned by one corporation. You, as a buyer, do not buy your apartment. You buy shares of stock in the corporation that owns the building.
So I'm not a homeowner. I'm a stock investor.
You're a shareholder. And along with your shares comes a document called a proprietary lease, which gives you the right to live in apartment 4B.
Okay, but why does that matter so much in practice?
It matters because you are going into business with all the other shareholders in the building. And because you're business partners, they have a legal right to decide who they want to do business with.
This is why co-op boards are so notorious. They can reject you for almost any reason.
Any reason that doesn't violate fair housing laws? Yes. They can look at your finances and decide your income isn't stable enough. They can reject you because they don't like that you play the drums. In a condo, your neighbor can't stop you from buying the unit next door. In a co-op, that neighbor is on the board and they are interviewing you to be their new business partner.
And this model isn't just a weird New York thing. We saw notes in the source material on similar structures globally.
That's right. In India, for example, particularly in big metro cities like Mumbai, the cooperative housing society is a very common model. It allows for collective management and ownership of these really high-density residential buildings.
And speaking of Mumbai, the research also highlighted a type of housing called chawls.
Yes.
These are fascinating. They often get described in English as just tenements, but they seem to have a unique social structure.
They really do. A chawl typically consists of many small 1- or 2-room private units for families, but they all open onto a shared long corridor or veranda, and they often share sanitation facilities.
So there's this forced interaction.
Yeah. An intense communal social fabric is created. The chawl culture is a recognized social phenomenon in Mumbai literature and cinema. It's high-density living where the boundaries between public and private space are incredibly porous.
It really challenges that American ideal of the white picket fence and the isolated single-family home.
Completely. And then on the other end of the spectrum in South Asia, you have the Havelis. These are the traditional mansions, often built around an internal courtyard. They were designed for large, multi-generational families and also for climate control in very hot weather. The architecture of real estate is always a reflection of a culture's family structure and climate.
Which brings us to the structure of our future, or maybe the crisis of our future. We can't have this conversation in the 21st century without talking about the environment.
And not just, planting some trees in the front yard.
No. We need to talk about what some people are calling the carbon bomb of the built environment.
The central statistic that everyone needs to know is 39%.
39%. Real estate buildings and their construction is responsible for roughly 39% of global carbon emissions.
It is a staggering number. It's more than transportation. It's more than industry. And we need to break that down because it comes from 2 different places.
Okay.
About 28% of that total is what we call operational carbon.
That's the energy to run the building, right?
Yeah.
The lights, the heating, the air conditioning.
Exactly. And that's the part we're getting better at fixing. We can add solar panels, we can install heat pumps, better insulation. We have a roadmap for that. But the other 11%, that's the hard part. That's embodied carbon.
This is the carbon footprint of the materials themselves, the concrete, the steel, the glass.
The process of making cement, which is the key ingredient in concrete, is responsible for something like 8% of all global CO2 emissions by itself.
Wow.
You cannot build a modern skyscraper without a massive upfront carbon footprint, no matter how many solar panels you eventually put on the roof. The damage is done before anyone even moves in.
So when we hear about green development or buildings with LEED certification, is that actually solving the problem? Or is some of it just, marketing?
It's a bit of both. LEED, which is the Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design certification, has definitely raised the baseline for the industry. It forces developers to think about water efficiency, material sourcing, and indoor air quality.
Which is all good.
It's all good, but there's a valid critique that it can be gamified. You can get points for putting in a bike rack or using bamboo floors, which is great, but that doesn't really offset the thousands of tons of concrete you just poured into the foundation.
The real pressure for change, though, it seems like it isn't coming from the plaque they put in the lobby. It's starting to come from the insurance companies.
This is where the rubber meets the road. This is where climate change stops being an abstract concept and starts having a price tag. We are now seeing a major retreat of insurance carriers from entire markets.
Like Florida and California.
Florida because of hurricanes and flooding, California because of wildfires. The risk models are telling these companies that some areas are becoming uninsurable at any price.
Yet if you can't get homeowners insurance,
You can't get a mortgage. The bank will not lend you hundreds of thousands of dollars on an asset that could be wiped out in an afternoon with no insurance to cover the loss.
so if you can't get a mortgage, the value of that real estate.
It goes to zero or close to it. We are facing a potential climate correction in real estate values that the market has not fully priced in yet. The fact that some of this land might be underwater or uninsurable in 20 or 30 years is a huge looming financial risk.
So the old mantra of location, location, location is being replaced.
It's being replaced by environment, environment, environment. The location doesn't matter if the environment becomes hostile.
Okay, let's pivot now to the money. Because for all the talk of homes and habitats and carbon, for a certain segment of the global population, real estate is purely a financial instrument. And this brings us to, well, the dark side.
The world of ultra-high-end real estate, anonymous shell companies, and money laundering.
I think people have a vague sense of this, the trope of the Russian oligarch in the London penthouse. But how does it actually work? How do you use a condo to wash dirty money?
It works through one key vulnerability: anonymity. In the U.S., for a very long time, it was incredibly easy. You could form an LLC, a limited liability company in a state like Delaware with almost no disclosure.
And then the LSC buys the property.
You could buy a $50 million penthouse in New York City, and the public deed would just say the owner is 123 Park Avenue LLC. No one had any idea who the actual human being, the beneficial owner behind that company was.
So let's say I'm a corrupt foreign official from a country with a weak rule of law, and I've just siphoned off $50 million in bribes. I can move that money into the U.S. banking system, use it to buy a penthouse through an anonymous LLC, and my money is now parked in a stable U.S. dollar-denominated asset. It's clean.
Precisely. It's often described as a safety deposit box in the sky. You aren't buying the apartment to live in it or even to rent it out. You are buying it simply to store value in a stable jurisdiction, the United States, where it's protected by strong property laws from being seized back home.
And so the apartment just sits there empty.
These are the dark towers. You walk past these ultra-luxury new developments at night and there are almost no lights on. And this contributes to the housing crisis in these cities because all this capital isn't building housing for people who actually live and work there. It's building high-end storage units for global capital.
Is the government doing anything to stop this?
They are trying to. The Treasury Department, through FinCEN, has started using something called geographic targeting orders, or GTOs.
What's that?
In certain high-risk markets like Manhattan, Miami, Los Angeles, they now require title insurance companies to identify and report the actual human being behind any all-cash purchase of luxury real estate made through a shell company.
So they're trying to peel back that corporate veil.
They are, slowly. But the money is like water. It always tries to find the cracks in the system.
Now, for the investors listening who are not laundering money but are just looking for a legitimate return, we need to talk about how money is actually made.
Yeah.
Because there is this pervasive myth that real estate always goes up.
That is a very dangerous lie. The land under the building usually appreciates because supply is fixed and population and demand tend to grow. But the structure itself, the house, that is a depreciating asset.
This is the concept you see in a phrasal called hedonic regression.
It sounds fancy, but it just means things rot. Roofs leak, pipes burst, HVAC systems fail, styles change. If you don't constantly put money into the house, what investors call capital expenditures or CapEx, the value of that physical structure goes to zero over time.
So when you see a house sell for a big profit 20 years after it was bought, it's really the value of the land carrying all the weight and overcoming the natural decay of the building itself.
Correct. Or the owner has spent a fortune on maintenance and upgrades over those 20 years that they aren't properly factoring into their so-called profit.
Okay, so let's break down the risk profiles for a serious investor. If I'm an institutional fund, I'm not just buying a building. I'm buying a specific risk strategy.
That's right. In the industry, we generally categorize them into three main buckets: core, value add, and opportunistic.
Okay, start with core. What's a core investment?
Core is the bonds of the real estate world.
Yeah.
It's low risk, low return. Think of a brand new, fully leased apartment building in a great neighborhood in Chicago with high credit tenants on long-term leases.
It's steady, predictable.
Very predictable. It generates stable cash flow from day one. You're not expecting huge appreciation. You're buying it to preserve your capital and get a steady dividend.
Okay, so that's core. What's value add?
Value add is the fixer-upper on a corporate scale. You buy an office building that is maybe only 70% occupied. The lobby is from the 1980s and looks tired. The rents are below market rate.
So there's potential there.
There's potential to add value. You put capital in, you renovate the lobby, you upgrade the common areas, you bring in a new leasing team to get it up to 95% occupancy with higher rents, and then you sell it. You are actively manufacturing appreciation. It's more risk, but a higher potential return.
Then finally, opportunistic.
Opportunistic is high risk, high reward. This is often ground-up development. You're buying a dirt lot and betting that in the 3 years it takes to get permits and build the thing, the market will still want what you built. Or you're buying a truly distressed asset, a hotel in foreclosure, a shopping mall that's half empty. You're betting you can turn it around, but there's a real chance it could go to zero.
So it's not one monolithic asset class. It's a whole spectrum of gambling.
It really is. From the safest bet on the board to the wildest moonshot.
Speaking of moonshots, I want to end with the ultimate real estate speculation. We'd spent this whole time talking about owning the earth, but what about owning, well, not the earth.
Extraterrestrial real estate.
I saw this in the See Also section of the source material, and I went down a complete rabbit hole. We have the Outer Space Treaty of 1967.
Yes, which is the foundational document of space law. And it states very clearly that no nation can claim sovereignty over a celestial body. The U.S. government can't plant a flag on the moon and say, this is the 51st state now.
But the treaty is conspicuously silent on the rights of private individuals and corporations.
That is the perceived loophole. And you have the U.S. Space Act of 2015, which goes a step further and says that American citizens are entitled to own and sell resources they extract from space-like minerals from an asteroid. But owning the land itself, that is a gray area the size of the galaxy.
So if a private company like SpaceX actually builds a self-sustaining city on Mars,
who is the landlord? Who makes the rules? Do U.S. property laws apply on Mars? If I buy a condo in Muskville and he decides to change the locks, what court do I go to enforce my property rights?
it brings us right back to the very beginning of our conversation, back to Vattel and the law of nations. We're going to need a law of planets.
We will, because real estate at the end of the day is a social and legal construct. It's a system of human agreement. If we all agree that you own that piece of land, then you own it. If we don't, then you just have a very expensive piece of dirt, or I guess moon dust.
So we have gone from the Roman Forum all the way to the surface of Mars. We've looked at the 4-cent acre and the $50 million penthouse.
It is a massive, complicated, and deeply human machine.
I think the biggest takeaway for me is that real estate isn't just a passive backdrop for our lives. It is an active participant in the economy, in social justice, and in the climate crisis. It's the most tangible thing most of us will ever own, and yet its value is driven by these powerful invisible forces, interest rates, zoning laws, carbon targets, and centuries of legal theory.
That's really well said. Next time you walk down the street, look at the buildings around you. Don't just see bricks and glass. See the zoning laws that dictated their height, see the carbon emissions from their concrete, see the global mortgage markets that finance them, and see the centuries of legal history that allows someone to say, that building is mine.
That's a wrap for this deep dive. Thanks for exploring the ground beneath our feet with us.
Thanks for listening.
We'll catch you on the next one.